Alexander Thorne did not raise his voice. He never did. He sat across from me in the main room of the lakeside house in northern Michigan, the one the company sometimes used for small off-site discussions, and spoke in the same even tone he used when he rejected a vendor proposal. "Julia, the timing on this pregnancy is terrible. We have the Henderson project launching in 6 weeks and I need every person at full capacity. You've always been reliable, but this changes the equation. I can't have someone on the team whose priorities are about to shift so dramatically. I did some checking after you mentioned your family situation last month. It turns out there are things in your background that make this even more complicated for us." HR agrees. "It's better to make a clean break now before things get messy. Your termination is effective at the end of this call. Rebecca will send the severance paperwork. Take it and move on. Fighting this will only make it worse for everyone involved, especially with a baby on the way. Hi, my name is Julia Mercer, I am 30 years old." I stayed seated for a moment after he finished. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen behind us. Outside the large windows, the lake was flat and gray under the October sky. I had driven up the night before expecting a planning session for the next quarter. Instead, I had just been fired in 5 sentences. Alexander stood, adjusted the cuff of his shirt, and walked toward the door that led to the deck. He did not look back. I gathered my bag and followed him out. The cold air hit my face as soon as the door opened. I walked to my car without saying anything else. He stayed on the deck, already on his phone before I reached the driveway. The drive back to the small rental cabin I had taken for the long weekend took 20 minutes. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the road. When I pulled into the gravel spot in front of the cabin, I turned the engine off and sat there with the keys in my lap. The termination itself was not the part that kept replaying. It was the line about checking my background and the family situation I had mentioned once in passing. I had told him my Aunt Patricia was sorting through some old boxes from my late uncle's business files. That was all. Nothing confidential. Nothing that should have mattered to Alexander Thorne. I went inside, set my bag on the kitchen table, and called Natalie Brooks. She answered on the second ring. "Julia? You sound off. What happened?" I told her exactly what Alexander had said, word for word. She was quiet for a few seconds. "He fired you because you're pregnant?" "He said the timing was bad for the team. Then he said he had been checking into my background." Natalie made a small sound I could not quite identify. "That's not normal. Even for him." "I know." We stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes. She told me to document everything and not to sign anything yet. I thanked her and hung up. The cabin felt too quiet after that. I made a cup of tea I did not drink and sat at the small wooden table by the window. The lake was visible through the trees. A few boats were still out, moving slowly in the late afternoon light. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. The number was from the company. I answered. "Julia, this is Rebecca Holt." The HR manager's voice was polite and distant. "I'm calling to follow up on your conversation with Alexander. Your employment has been terminated effective today. We're prepared to offer a severance package of 4 weeks' pay in exchange for a signed release. The documents will be in your email within the hour. I recommend you review them promptly." I did not answer right away. She waited. "Is there anything else you need from me right now?" she asked. "No," I said. "There isn't." She ended the call. I opened my laptop and refreshed my email. The message from HR was already there. The attachment was a standard-looking release form. I did not open it. Instead, I scrolled back through my sent emails from the last few months, looking for the one where I had mentioned my aunt's boxes. It was there, a short note to Alexander about taking a personal day to help sort through family papers. Nothing more. I closed the laptop. The light outside was starting to fade. I thought about calling my aunt Patricia, but I did not want to alarm her over something that might be nothing. Instead, I called the family friend who had worked with my late uncle years ago. Raymond Ellis answered after 4 rings. "Julia," he said. His voice sounded careful. "It's been a while. Everything all right?" I told him I had been let go that afternoon and that my boss had mentioned looking into my background. I asked if he knew of anything in the old files that might have come up. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. "I shouldn't be talking about this over the phone," he said finally. "But there were some papers your uncle left that mentioned a side agreement on a project from about 8 years back. It involved Thorne's old firm before he joined your company. I thought it was settled a long time ago. Patricia has the copies now. I told her not to dig too deep unless someone came asking." He stopped. I waited. "Raymond," I said. "What kind of side agreement?" He exhaled. "The kind that was supposed to stay buried. Look, I have to go. Call Patricia. Ask her about the folder marked with your uncle's initials and the date 2017. But Julia, be careful what you do with whatever you find. Some things are easier to leave alone." The line went dead. I set the phone down on the table. Outside, the last of the daylight was disappearing behind the trees. The cabin was getting cold. I stood up, turned on the lamp by the couch, and walked to the window. The lake was almost black now. A single light moved slowly across the water, probably someone heading in for the night. I stayed there for a while, one hand resting on the glass. The firing had been sudden, but it had not been random. Alexander had already been looking. He had known something was there before I ever said the word pregnant. And now a man I had not spoken to in 2 years had just told me to open a folder I had never heard of. I turned away from the window and picked up my phone again. I did not call anyone else that night. I sat on the couch with the lamp on and the rest of the cabin dark, listening to the quiet outside. The long weekend had only just begun. If your boss ever ended your employment in the middle of a private conversation while hinting he already knew things about your life you had not shared with him, you know the particular silence that follows. What do you do when the person who controls your paycheck decides your pregnancy and your family history are both liabilities at the same time? The next morning the cabin felt colder than the evening before. I woke before the sun was fully up and made coffee I barely tasted. The folder Raymond Ellis had told me about was not something I could ignore. I called my Aunt Patricia at 7:30. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice already guarded. "Julia. I was wondering when you would call." I told her what Raymond had said. She was quiet for a moment. "I have the papers," she said. "Your uncle kept them separate from everything else. He never wanted them mixed with the regular files. I can send you photos of the first few pages if you want to see them now." "Please," I said. The images came through a few minutes later. I opened them on my laptop at the kitchen table. The first page was dated 2017. It was a side letter attached to a larger consulting contract between my uncle's small firm and the company Alexander Thorne had worked for at the time. The letter outlined an additional performance payment that was supposed to be triggered if certain project milestones were met. The amount was substantial, enough to have changed my uncle's business and, by extension, what he could have left behind. My uncle's signature was at the bottom. Alexander Thorne's name appeared in the distribution list as the person who had reviewed and approved the structure on behalf of his old firm. The second page was an internal note, never sent to my uncle, suggesting the payment be deferred indefinitely due to budget realignment. The note was initialed by Alexander Thorne. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady, but I could feel the pulse in my wrists. The pregnancy had been making itself known more clearly the last few days, small waves of nausea that came without warning. I stood up, ran cold water over my wrists, and called Natalie Brooks again. She listened. while I described what I had seen. "Julia, that looks like they buried a debt," she said. And if Thorne was the one who signed off on deferring it, he had every reason to make sure no one from your family ever came looking. "I was never supposed to know," I said. "Exactly. And now you're pregnant and he's already cut you loose. That timing isn't a coincidence." We ended the call. I sat back down at the table and opened my work email out of habit. There was a new message from Rebecca Holt, sent at 6 that morning. "Julia, per our conversation yesterday, please confirm receipt of the severance documents. To keep this process clean for both sides, we ask that you refrain from discussing the circumstances of your departure with any current or former colleagues. Any public statements could affect the severance offer. Let me know if you have questions." I did not reply. Instead, I opened a different email, one from Victor Lang, a senior colleague I had worked with for 3 years. It was short. "Team was told you resigned for personal reasons. If there's more to it, some of us would like to know. Ethan Cole said he saw you leave the lakeside house yesterday looking upset. Call me if you want to talk." Ethan Cole was the colleague who had been in the office when I first mentioned my aunt's boxes to Alexander. He had been within earshot. I set the phone down without answering either message. By mid-morning, the nausea had settled into a steady background discomfort. I drove into the small town center to pick up something bland to eat and to clear my head. The streets were quiet. Most of the summer tourists were gone. A few locals nodded as I passed. I bought soup and bread and sat in my car in the small parking lot behind the store. My phone rang while I was still there. The number was unfamiliar. I answered anyway. "Ms. Mercer? This is Benjamin Shaw. I'm an attorney representing certain interests connected to an agreement your late uncle entered into in 2017. We have been attempting to locate the proper successor for some time. The window to formally acknowledge and activate the remaining obligations under that agreement closes in 45 days. I understand you may have recently become aware of the documents. Is that correct?" I kept my voice even. "How did you get this number?" "Public records and a mutual contact who preferred to remain unnamed. I can send you the verification documents electronically if you would like to review them before we speak further." The original agreement included a condition that the beneficiary or successor provide in-person or notarized confirmation within a set period after the triggering event. That period began last month when the final project milestone was formally closed out. I watched a leaf drift across the windshield. "What is the value of the remaining obligation?" Benjamin Shaw paused. "The deferred performance payment, plus accrued interest and a small equity component tied to the original project, comes to approximately $420,000. It was structured to be paid to your uncle's firm or its designated successor upon verification. Your name appears in the succession documents your uncle filed years ago." I did not answer immediately. He waited. "Ms. Mercer, I would strongly advise you to speak with independent counsel before taking any action. And I would also advise you to be careful who you discuss this with. Some parties have a vested interest in the agreement remaining unclaimed." The call ended. I sat in the car with the soup cooling on the passenger seat. $420,000. Not the kind of money that changes everything overnight, but enough to have given the options. Enough that Alexander Thorne would have seen it as a problem if I ever connected it to him. I drove back to the cabin. The afternoon light was thin. I parked and sat for a while with the engine off, watching the trees move in the wind. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander Thorne. "Rebecca tells me you haven't confirmed the severance. I hope you're not considering doing anything impulsive. You have a child to think about now. Some things are better left in the past." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the seat beside me. The nausea returned, sharper this time. I closed my eyes and waited for it to pass. When I opened them again, the lake was visible through a gap in the trees. The water looked colder than it had the day before. I had been loyal to that company for 4 years. I had stayed late, taken the difficult projects, and never pushed back when Alexander moved deadlines or changed scope without warning. I had believed that if I was useful enough and quiet enough, I would be safe. The pregnancy had made me less useful. The buried agreement had made me a risk. Both facts had existed before I walked into that lakeside house yesterday. Alexander had simply waited for the moment when he could use one to justify removing the other. I picked up the phone and opened the message from Benjamin Shaw that had arrived while I was driving. It contained a single PDF and a short note, "Review at your discretion. The 45-day window is not flexible." I did not open the file. Not yet. I carried the soup inside, heated it on the small stove, and ate half of it standing at the counter. The cabin was quiet except for the wind against the windows. Outside, the long weekend continued exactly as it was supposed to, slow, ordinary, the kind of stretch of days people use to rest. I had come here expecting to plan the next quarter. Instead, I was standing in a rented kitchen holding proof that the man who had just fired me had spent years making sure a debt to my family stayed unpaid. My phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca Holt. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was brief and professional. "Julia, we need your signed release by end of day tomorrow if you want the severance to remain on the table. Alexander asked me to remind you that any discussion of internal matters with third parties could be viewed as a breach of your confidentiality obligations. Please don't force us to escalate." I deleted the voicemail without listening to it a second time. Then I opened my contacts and found Dr. Olivia Kent's number. I had an appointment scheduled for next week, but the nausea was getting harder to manage and the stress was not helping. I sent a short text asking if there was any earlier availability. She replied within 10 minutes that she could see me the following afternoon if I could make the drive. I confirmed. Then I sat at the table again and opened the PDF Benjamin Shaw had sent. The first page was the same side letter I had already seen. The second page listed the current outstanding amount and the verification requirement. My name was listed as successor. There was a signature line waiting for me. I closed the file. The cabin was getting dark. I turned on the lamp and left the rest of the lights off. The wind had picked up. Somewhere out on the lake a boat motor started and then faded. I stayed at the table with the phone in front of me and the half-eaten soup growing cold again. Alexander had known. He had known for years. The pregnancy had simply given him the clean reason he needed to act before the 45-day window closed and I had any leverage to ask questions. He had calculated the risk and moved first. I had spent 4 years believing that loyalty and competence were enough. They had never been enough. They had only been convenient until they were not. I picked up the phone and opened a new message to Natalie Brooks. I typed 3 words and then deleted them. I did not know yet what I was going to do. I only knew that the version of my life I had been carefully maintaining had ended the moment Alexander Thorne decided my pregnancy and my family's old agreement were both problems he could solve at the same time. The phone buzzed once more. Another text from Alexander. "Last chance to keep this simple. Sign the release. Take the money. Start over somewhere else. You don't want this to get any more complicated than it already is." I turned the screen off without replying. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The long weekend was not even halfway over. I stayed at the table until the soup was completely cold. The wind had picked up outside and the cabin creaked in the dark. I did not open the PDF again that night. I turned off the lamp, went to bed, and lay awake listening to the trees. The next morning I drove to the appointment with Dr. Olivia Kent. She confirmed the pregnancy was progressing normally and gave me a list of things to watch for with the nausea. I thanked her, paid the copay, and left without telling her anything about the job or the documents. Some things were not her problem to carry. When I got back to the cabin, there was another message from Rebecca Holt. This one was shorter. Julia, Alexander has asked me to make one final offer. Sign the release by tomorrow and we will include an additional 2 weeks of pay. This is the last extension. After that the offer is withdrawn and we will proceed with standard termination protocols. I read it once and deleted it. Then I called my Aunt Patricia. She answered quickly this time. I saw the rest of the papers, I said. Thorne was the one who deferred the payment. Patricia was quiet. Your uncle suspected as much, but he never had proof he could use without dragging the whole firm into it. He let it go to protect the rest of the business. I think he would have wanted you to do the same. I'm not sure what I want yet, I said. Whatever you decide, don't let them make you the problem, she said. You have enough to carry already. We ended the call. I sat on the porch steps with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the lake. The long weekend was slipping away. Most of the boats were gone now. The water looked heavier under the gray sky. My phone rang while I was still outside. It was Alexander Thorne. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered. Julia, he said. His voice was the same calm tone from the lakeside house. Rebecca tells me you're still thinking. I wanted to speak to you directly one last time. This doesn't have to be difficult. You're starting a family. That requires stability. The severance and the release give you that. Fighting over old paperwork that doesn't even have your name on the original signature line will only cost you time and money you don't have right now. I waited until he finished. You knew about the side agreement before you ever called me into that house, I said. He did not deny it. I knew there were loose ends from years ago. I also knew you were about to become a liability in more ways than one. Pregnancy changes priorities. So does unexpected money. I simply removed the variable before it became a problem for the team. The team, I repeated. Or for you. Both, he said. Sign the release. Take the money. Raise your child without this hanging over you. That is the responsible choice. I ended the call without answering. Then I blocked his number and Rebecca Holt's. I sat on the steps until my hands were cold from holding the phone. The wind had died down. The lake was still. That evening I received one more email. It was from Benjamin Shaw. The subject line was simple: formal confirmation of outstanding obligation and verification window. The body was short. The attachment was a scanned letter on old letterhead from Alexander Thorne's former firm, dated 2018, confirming that the performance payment had been intentionally held back and that any successor claim would require notarized verification within 45 days of the final project closeout. The letter was signed by Alexander Thorne. The amount matched what Shaw had told me. I read the letter twice. Then I closed the laptop and went into the bathroom. I turned on the shower and stood under the water until it ran cold. When I came out I sat on the edge of the bed in a towel and cried in a way I had not allowed myself to since the phone call in the lakeside house. It was not loud. It was the kind of crying that comes when you finally understand how much you have already lost and how much more you are about to lose by choice. The team lunches I used to look forward to. The projects I had stayed up late to finish because I believed the work mattered. The quiet assumption that if I was competent and loyal I would be protected. All of it was gone. I had been loyal to a man who had spent years making sure a debt to my family stayed buried and who had used my pregnancy as the clean reason to cut me loose before I could ask questions. The loyalty had only ever protected him. When the crying stopped I dried my face and got dressed. I packed my bag, loaded the car, and drove away from the cabin before the sun was fully down. I did not stop in town. I did not call Natalie or Patricia or anyone else. I drove south on the highway with the radio off and the windows cracked so the cold air would keep me awake. The 45-day window would close without me. The severance would go unclaimed. The job was already gone. The routines I had built around that office and those people were gone with it. I had chosen to walk away from all of it rather than fight for something that had never been mine to begin with. 2 weeks later I was back in my own apartment. The nausea had eased. I had started looking for contract work I could do from home. I had not unblocked Alexander or Rebecca. I had not contacted Benjamin Shaw again. The letter from his office sat in a folder on my desk unopened after the first read. Some mornings I still reached for my work phone out of habit before remembering it was no longer there. The silence where the team chat used to be felt heavier than I expected. I had not realized how much of my day had been shaped by those small shared rhythms until they were gone. I was still pregnant. The baby moved more now, small flutters that felt like questions I could not answer yet. I had not told anyone at the old company what I had found. I had not tried to claim the money or expose the old agreement. I had simply stopped participating in the version of my life that required me to stay loyal to people who had already decided I was disposable. The isolation was not dramatic. It was the absence of things I used to take for granted, the quick messages from colleagues, the sense that my work belonged somewhere, the small safety of knowing the next paycheck was already arranged. Those things were gone and I had chosen not to fight to keep them. That choice felt both necessary and lonely in equal measure. Thank you for listening to my story. If your boss ever made you realize that your loyalty had only ever been convenient until it was not, and that walking away meant losing the routines and the people you had built your days around, what would you have done?